Welcome to the Story a Day podcast. This is Julie Duffy, encouraging you to be a writer today, not someday. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. It's Julie here from the Story a Day podcast. I have a fantastic interview coming up for you, a conversation with Tammy Breitweiser, who's a writer and educator, and I'll do the proper introduction in a minute. But I just wanted to take a moment right now to tell you I'm recording this on April the 25th. Or is it the 26th? I don't know. I'm losing track of time. I'm sure we all are. But you know what that means. Story a Day May is right around the corner. It's less than a week away. And if you've ever thought about doing some more writing, it's a wonderful way to get yourself challenged. We're going to talk in the conversation with Tammy about the value of many different types of challenges and ways of doing them. I would encourage you to come over to the website and look at the Writer Code workshop that I've put together. It's a special new piece that I've put together for this year to get you into the groove before Story a Day begins. The Writer Code is an acronym and it stands for the pieces of the process that I've used to become more creative, more productive, and more fulfilled as a writer. So I've been running people through this course all week and the comments have been absolutely brilliant. People are taking on the challenges that I've issued them. They are excited, they are nervous, they're giddy. There's a couple of tiny little tasks I gave people to do which have had a massive impact. So I encourage you to go over to storyaday.org/writer-code, CODE, and just dig into the 3-part series and see if you can take some of the steps that I and writers in the Story a Day community have taken in order to become more creative, more productive, more fulfilled. There's also information at the site about the Superstars group. You'll hear me and Tammy talk about that in this interview a little bit, just allude to it. It's open. This is it's open for the first time this year for new members. This is the group that I run. It's kind of a mastermind and a coaching and a accountability community that has really grown over the past couple of years, the Story a Day. And it's where people are really making the biggest strides in their writing lives. And I really, if it sounds like something you're interested in, I will provide links in the show notes. If you're looking for a writing community, if you're ready to take the next steps and stop just like noodling around with your writing, but actually make it part of your life. The Superstars is the best way I have found to support you in that. It's open just for this week until Story a Day starts on May the 1st. Strongly advise you have a look at it. It's not right for everyone. It's you making a commitment to yourself that you are ready to take your writing further, and we are there to support you on every step of that journey for the next year in the Superstars group. If you're interested, check out the show notes and or come over to Story a Day and look for the links about that. All right, well, on to the interview. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. Tammy had some stuff to say that surprised me and made me kind of stop and think about things in a different way. So I always appreciate people coming on and giving a different voice and sharing their experiences with writing. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the interview. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. This is Julie from the Story a Day podcast, and today I have a guest with me. Tammy Breitweiser is a writer and a teacher who is a force of nature, an accidental inspirationalist, the keeper of little red doors, and a conjurer of everyday magic, who's always busy writing short stories. Her flash fiction has been published in the Ninja Writers Monthly, Spelk, Clover and White, and Elephants Never. She has an essay in the I Wrote It Anyway anthology, which is a great title. And you can connect with Tammy through Twitter and Medium and sign up for her newsletter. And all of those links will be in the show notes. Tammy, welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
It's lovely to have you here. People may not know, but as well as all those other things, you are a Story a Day participant and have been for a couple of years now. So it's lovely to get a chance to talk to you about your writing and things like that. But I have to start with Keeper of Little Red Doors.
Yes. So I have always been fascinated with fairies and those types of magical creatures. And so I had a friend a long time ago who made me a little fairy door. And so I always am looking for the little fairy doors in the woods when I'm walking. And I think that that leads to why I write a lot of speculative fiction. There's always a little bit of magic, a little bit of twist. So that's how I'm the keeper of the little red doors. I put these little pathways in my stories that you may or may not know where they're going.
Excellent. I love that. I mean, I see a lot of those kind of things. I live in an old steel town that's been getting arguably hipsterized over the last few years, but it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of people coming in. So there's a lot of creativity here. So I'll occasionally stumble across things like that, little fairy doors and things just in people's front yards or along street, along the stores in the main street. So that's very fun. I think it's wonderful to keep a little magic in our lives. So
Absolutely.
what is your history with writing, and how long have you been doing this? How long have you wanted to do this? When did you start to take it seriously?
Oh my. I've always been a writer when I was little. I was an introvert then and didn't have the word for that. I spent a lot of my youth writing. I laugh and say that I started writing as soon as I could hold the pen in my hand. And in fact, my grandmother found a story that I had written a couple years ago and gave it back to me, which was a very interesting experience to read that again. But I wrote a lot of poetry. I like to be concise with my words sometimes. But I started really taking it seriously just a couple years ago. Even though I wrote every day, since 2016, 2017, and I've had a daily practice, I didn't start calling myself a writer until last January. And then I got business cards with writer on them, and I started to take it much more seriously. And that was when I started submitting, actually, as well. I submitted a couple things here and there, but not like I am now.
So what do you think helped you or drove you to take that next step to say, I'm not just going to sit, and write every morning. I'm actually going to be a writer?
Well, I have to say that it was story a day.
Aw.
It is. It really is. And Julie did not pay me to say that.
For sure.
Yeah. I found Story a Day in 2017. I originally had thought it was 2016, but I went back I actually had to go back to Nano because I had heard you on another podcast talking about Story a Day. And I was intrigued by this idea of finishing a story in one day and then moving on to the next one. Because even as an everyday writer, I had lots of starts to things, but I very rarely finished. And the way you talked on the podcast, I thought, you know what? I think I can really do that. And so I had just missed Story a Day September. So I self-imposed, and people will learn from this chat that I love challenges, especially self-imposed ones. So I decided, well, you know what? I don't have to wait. I can just go ahead and impose the Story a Day challenge on myself. So after I listened to you, it was the middle of October. I just started writing and finishing a story every day, which then led into NaNoWriMo, which led to a month of writing stories then. And then I have not stopped.
And I think you took me up on my challenge to be public about it, because I remember coming across posts from you. I think even though the challenge wasn't running live, you were posting at the prompts at the site saying that you were writing. So that was really fun for me to see somebody going through it on their own. And then you took off, and here you are. So I'm glad you found us.
Me too. Well, and I really found out, I kept trying to write a novel and kept trying to write poetry, and the poetry works, but poetry is different. And coming to Story a Day, I found out how much I loved short stories, and that was what I loved to write. I just didn't know. And what was interesting is that I came to find short story because I couldn't remember any short stories that I had read. And then when I found some old writing from high school and things like that, I had realized I had analyzed short stories. The only one I knew was The Celestial Omnibus by Forrester. And I loved that because, of course, it had magic. And I didn't know what an omnibus was at the time. So that intrigued me. And the magic is there. So that's what I write now. So I was influenced by it, but didn't realize it until later.
That's really interesting. So how do you, because you know, like most of us, this is not your day job. And how do you stay productive?
Well, I write every day, but I control the time as much as I can. I don't let it control me. I write in the edges a lot. I have a Keep app on my phone that connects to Google. It's a Google product that connects. So if I'm making notes, I can use my voice to text even in the car, or if I'm walking or something else. And I write every morning. I do morning pages. And this morning I revised a story because I realized I had a deadline and forgot about it. So I'm always writing.
But you've created that space for yourself, right?
Yes. I get up early, but I take time, and I made sure to start writing down things. I always carry a notebook. I'm a teacher during the day. And when I was coaching, I always had a notebook with me. And when kids say something interesting, I would write it down. Or if I heard a conversation or I read something, I would always make that note, because if I don't, then I completely lose it. And then I would go back to those notebooks and write from there. And also finding the community at Story a Day. There's something very motivating about having something that you're excited to write about, and having people who understand that joy and that, like, oh my gosh, I need to write this right now. And to have that shared community. I didn't realize how much the community was so helpful until we started sort of analyzing that and thinking about it. And then I kept hearing more and more podcasts about tribe and community. So that's part of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I surprised me as well. Yeah. I didn't sort of set out to do this, but it was the thing that I noticed, that the people who stuck around and participated and talked to other people were the people who were still there at the end of the month and still writing at the end of the month. And so we started to extend that throughout the year. And it really surprised me, because so many of us are introverted, and yet we still need people.
The other thing too is that I always have prompts available for myself. I'm one of those people who likes to write with a prompt. And sometimes that's just a word. I get a daily prompt sent to me in my email every day. Sometimes I just go back to, the goddess of writing instruction, Natalie Goldberg, and I use I remember or I don't remember. And one of the favorite ones I have lately is the 10 noticings, which I write down 10 things that I notice. And Austin Kleon talks about that too, to write a list of 10 things and then write about it the next day. I don't always write it about the next day, and if I don't have a lot of time to write, if the schedule is really busy, then I always at least set aside 10 minutes. And I start for 10 minutes, and even if I have to set the timer, and I write. But I don't wait for the muse to come. I just write. It always right. Works.
Yes. It's amazing how often I hear that from people, that the muse comes when you sit down to write. Like once you start writing, that's when you find that you can be creative.
Yes, I can open that little red door and go through it.
Aha. Have you noticed, as you have consciously started to write more, and not just write but craft pieces, are you noticing a voice emerging that is your voice? Did you know what your voice was anyway? Are you noticing themes that come up for yourself? Like, what has been the effect of actually writing a lot?
So some of the byproducts I like to emulate. I think we all have favorite writers, and so I've done a better job of analyzing that. And there's the difference between reading a piece and then trying to write something like that. And I think sometimes then we tend to parrot the author's voice. However, I've been starting to analyze stories that I've read and just look at lines, or I feel a certain way in this section. And then I go back and I look at it and I think, okay, what did the author do to make me feel this way? Or why do I love this book so much? Why do I like this character, but I don't like this character? So I started with writing so much, I started to look more at the craft of what I was reading, which is funny because as a reading specialist and a writing teacher, especially with middle schoolers a couple years ago, we even started doing that. But I never did that as much in my own writing.
Do you think there's a particular type of story or message that's starting to, or sort of shared theme that's starting to come out in your own writing that you've noticed?
Yes, I do notice patterns. I'm always writing about something that is lost. Either a person is lost, or they've lost something, or they've lost something of themselves that they can't find. And so that's most of the change in my stories are internal, not external. And also, I like to kill people off, apparently.
I was going to raise that, yeah.
Yeah, I think Almo brought that up one time. It's like, Tammy always kills her people in her story. There's always some sort of really large contrast, I think, in my writing where there's evil and then there's not evil, and something happens. Yeah, big change usually tends to be killing people. And I don't know if that's because it's so final. I mean, when you start to finish stories, I mean, when you have to finish a story and you make yourself do it, I mean, you have to end it somehow. And I'm not doing a dream sequence. I've banned that for myself.
Okay.
So death, I think, is easier for me. I don't know, maybe I'm dealing with my own grief and disappointment of things that I feel that I've lost through my life, through my writing.
Quite likely. I mean, I think we do, we delve into ourselves. But the thing I like about your stories is that even though they're not always a happy ending, as you have alluded to, or it's not always a happy subject matter, I've noticed there's kind of a subversive hope and justice that comes through in your stories. Not to overanalyze and make you, like hyper aware of what you're writing. I don't want to stall you, but that's certainly something that, like, even though there are bad things happening in your stories, I quite often am smiling at the end.
Well, that's good to know. That's an interesting observation. I think there is an underlying hope, because I think you cannot help to have little pieces of you sprinkled through your stories. I mean, all of the stories come from you, so you're going to have pieces of that. I mean, there are many characters that I write that are definitely not me. They are pieces or a moment that I felt. I do like description. I really try to describe things in a way that's very different than I've ever seen before, because I don't like cliche. I feel that it takes the reader out of the story unless you're using it for irony or some purpose like that. But I'm glad that there's hope. I don't want them to be doomed, but I've had some bad things happen to me in my years, and I always try to look on the bright side or learn from those experiences. And I think that I want my characters to do the same thing, because that's what I go to stories for as a reader. I want to see how someone else thinks through their words and through their characters. And so I think that helps me be more well-rounded as well.
Yeah, and we need to, there's always going to be an audience out there that needs to know they're not alone in going through these experiences.
Absolutely.
So, speaking of things that we will all endure, rejection is one of them, and you have started a really interesting project. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So I started the 100 Rejections Project, and this is not my idea. I mean, many people have done that. But at the end of last year, there was a conversation with a small creative group that I'm involved in, and we were talking about what we were going to do with the last 100 days of 2019. And so I kept going back and forth about what I wanted to do, and I actually ended up with something non writing related, funny enough. But then as I kept thinking, I couldn't shake the hundred number. And I love challenges. And I thought, you know what, I need a new project for January. And I know we talked about it on one of our hangout calls for the superstars, but I had made the comment, and then I also wrote an article on Medium about how I was moving from a phase of creation into a phase of revision. Because when you write every day from October of 2017 until present day, you have quite a Google file and notebooks full of words. And I realized that I was only revising if I had to take it to an in real life writing group, or we had to do critique, or I was sending it to another small group, or I wanted to send it out. And that wasn't enough. Like I felt like I had reached a point where I needed to do something with the stories. And challenges actually help me refine my systems through action. Because the original plan was just to send out one piece, the equivalent of one piece a day for 100 days and see what happens. And so, of course, I have a spreadsheet, which is actually quite fun to track. It's actually quite satisfying. I mean, I know that Austin Kleon talks about, I mean, there is brain research that shows when you make that X, after you do something, that it releases something. So my rules is that I could batch them. I could do 7 for the week or a couple, but I needed to stay on track. And I've been really good about the record keeping. So when you have to send out so many pieces, you have to revise. And of course, I had some pieces revised that I hadn't done anything with from several classes, because I'm always learning. I'm always trying to find new things to learn about by myself and through people who are smarter than I am and who do more than I do. And then, so I sent them out to the flash fiction and fiction publications that I knew of, that I love and read. But then after a while, when you're sending out one piece a day, you start to run out of places that you know. And so I started the other page. I have another tab on the spreadsheet, which talks about possible places for submissions. That also has things like the web link. And I also have what some of the parameters, like submission dates and things like that, how many words, depending on what it is. But through this process, not only did I learn that I could revise and get published, that my numbers aren't really that bad. Some publishers take a long time to respond, which is okay. But then I got to read all this amazing fiction that became even more inspiring, and then I think is making my writing better. So if you start with the idea that the point is to get the rejections, then when the rejections come, they don't sting as much. You just put it in the spreadsheet like, hey, I got another rejection. Let's move on to the next thing. A couple pieces I've revised several times. And what's fabulous too is that here's the thing, as writers, the bottom line is that we want someone to read our writing. And when we write it, it might not be right then, and we might not be ready, but eventually we're going to want someone to read that writing. Here's the thing. If you send it to someone, that guarantees that they're going to read it. You automatically have a reader. It doesn't really matter whether they liked it or not in that moment. Somebody is reading what you took the time to craft. and maybe they might have some feedback that will be invaluable and make it better, that you can send it off to the next place. So lots of great reading. The less staying, I mean, if you think about the rejection every day and not every, couple months, then it makes a huge difference in how you feel. So it's a complete mindset change. It doesn't stop me from writing. It actually makes it motivating to do it more.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, because that is something that is very scary for people, the idea of being rejected. And for sure, when you're sending things out, you're just sending one or two pieces out and you get your hopes up and they come back. It really does sting. But you've got this like, no, I'm trying to get to 100 rejections. So like almost every time you get an acceptance, you're like, dang it.
I wouldn't go that far. I am excited when it's accepted. No, but it's a much different feeling. And I don't want people to misunderstand, because I know that there's some naysayers around the 100 rejections about like, oh, well, she just shouldn't send things out for 100 rejections. I mean, the point is, of course, that I would love to be accepted. I mean, I want more people to read my writing, but I want it to be the best that it can be as well. So it's not like I'm sending out things that are half done, or that I'm not confident in, or that I have not revised or sent to other people to read. They're polished pieces. They might not be ready for publication yet, but they are polished. So they're not just I'm sending a lot of things out, but I backlogged a lot of words and a lot of stories that I have to choose from. And what's interesting is that some of them get lost in the Google file. I love Google, but sometimes if I'm searching for something, it will not come up. I know it's there. So I stumble across some of my writing that I haven't seen for a while, and I can look at it with new eyes, because I've gone through lots of classes now in Flash and story writing, and read more now. So some of those things that didn't work before, I can make them work now. And then it's exciting to send the piece out to see what somebody says.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's really interesting, because we do come back, when you come back to a story, having written the next story and the next story and having taken a class, you definitely, you can maybe see ways to fix it, or maybe see that this isn't something that you want to send out anymore, or whatever.
I think too.
No, carry on.
I think too that finishing so many pieces, I think Neil Gaiman has a quote about finishing, that you learn more from finishing the piece than you do from starting it, because you have to end it in some way. And you can't end all the stories the same way, as we talked about earlier. But I think too, doing so much and finishing so many stories, you learn better questions to ask when you are in a critique circle, or when you have a writer friend read it and you say, can you read it for this, this, and this, because this is where I feel like I have more words to articulate what feedback I need.
Right. And obviously you are not just throwing out any old writing and in the hopes of getting 100 rejections, because you've been having some success in placing things.
Yes, which is exciting.
How many pieces have you placed so far this year?
Oh, goodness. I think 5.
And we're only in February.
Yes.
So that's not too shabby. So would you recommend that people try this?
I think that if it's something that interests them, absolutely. But I'm one that's driven by a challenge. I like that everyday piece. So if you're driven by that, and it doesn't have to be one a day. I mean, that's extreme. I have a friend who is using the Ray Bradbury quote of 52 stories. So she's writing one story a week. There are places where you write one story a month. I think whatever works for you, and especially for sending it out, I think that you need to have written and have a catalog of your own work that you can pick from and kind of learn from, and what your voice is. But I
And
think
it can be hard to have that patience, right, to get the writing done and not send everything out immediately.
yeah, I've tried to write a couple things, and then also I will say this: if you do the 100 rejections project in any way, shape, or form, even if it's 10 rejections, please make sure that you follow the submission guidelines. And you would think that this would be a universal thing, but it is not. One of the superstars had said that she had submitted something, and it had asked you to copy a sentence in the middle of your cover letter to make sure that they knew that you had actually read the submission guidelines. Some people want different font. Some people want
Actually,
different.
you broke up a bit there. Can I
Oh,
get you to say that again? Just from following about if you want to do the 100 rejections,
if you
then to
want to,
follow the guidelines.
okay. If you want to do your own 100 rejections or some sort of form of that, you need to make sure to follow the submission guidelines. Because if you don't follow the guidelines, then you will for sure be rejected, and not in a happy way. Certain places want a particular font. Some want it copied in the email. Some don't want emails at all. Some go through submittable. Just make sure you read it. And different document types, I found, has been a very particular thing too. Some want docs. Some want PDFs. Some want other types of things. So just make sure that you read those things, because you don't want a story to get rejected that you've worked hours on because you didn't use the right font.
Right. And it seems like it's almost like a second job, but like you say, I mean, you've put in all this work into the story anyway. You might as well take a few minutes to figure out, to get it dressed properly.
Absolutely. And, we're over halfway now for 50 pieces or 50 things sent out. But because the 100 days originally stretched into April, but now that I've had some acceptances, it's going to stretch a little farther. One of the things that I've learned in particular this week after several pieces being sent out is that there are ways that I thought I was streamlining, and then it does take time to submit. I mean, you do have to read the guidelines, and then you have to get the piece ready in whatever form they like. But many places that accept flash fiction will accept up to 3 flash fiction pieces at a time, which of course is a different cover letter. And I can't recommend Windy Lynn Harris's book enough. I mean, it really is a great resource if you have no idea where to start. And so I just figured out that I need to have a cover letter that deals with one piece, and then underneath that I have one that has for the 3, or if it's a poem or if it's an essay. And then that way I don't have to waste the time of going in and changing everything. Then I just have to change the title.
That's a great point. I'm a really big fan of writing templates ahead of time for tasks like that you're going to be doing over and over again, because it can be such a barrier if you're like, I'm going to submit, and then you're like, oh, they want a cover letter. What am I going to write? And just that tiny little thing, seems like a tiny little thing, can hang you up for days or weeks or forever. But if you have that template sitting there on a drive somewhere, and you can go, okay, just going to send this. It's got, here's my story, title, here's my bio. Thank you very much. Hope to hear from you soon, or whatever, yours sincerely. And then you don't have to think about it again. And you can get over that little hesitation that might be the difference between you actually submitting and not. So that's a great idea.
Because it seems like if you write a piece, that's between 100 and 500 words, that it shouldn't take you an hour to submit it.
Yes, yeah, and you don't want to, especially with short stories, you don't want to explain the whole story, and they just want to know that you're a professional person who's not a lunatic, and can aren't going to be horrendous to deal with, and they're going to read the story because it's just a short story. So yeah, you don't have to worry too much about doing a summary, not like with a novel where you have to do a query. Yeah, it's just a matter of, hi, here's my story, here's who I am, cheers.
Yes. It's also forcing me to revise now to the project is because what has happened is that some publishers are really fast. Like I've gotten rejections within a day sometimes. And then there are some that have been out for quite a while. Well, about 2 weeks ago, I realized that I had reached a point where all the stories that I had revised up to that point were either out or published. So I had to revise something else, which was a whole other thought. You know, it's like, oh, when you have all of your pieces that you've polished out, what do you do now? You dive back in and revise some more.
And that's why I love challenges, because, you know, we can have the best intentions in the world, but if you've set yourself a goal or a target, and especially if you've made it public, then you come up against these moments of resistance when you're like, oh, I don't have anything new. And you're like, well, I just have to revise something then.
And you hit on a good point there too. The challenge, especially making it public, which I have done with this particular project, you know, my writing friends are my accountability partners. You know, they will ask, I've put 2 updates on Medium of the numbers because I have the spreadsheet. It'll be interesting to see at the end of the project what the average response time was.
Mm. And I will recommend, and I'll link to one of the, at least one of the Medium pieces you put up, because it is interesting to see, you know, to hear your reports from the field, as it were, you know, like as it's going in, because one of them is from 23 days into the project. And so like how you're feeling about it. And one of the lessons that you learned, which you might not remember at the end, that I really liked, is you talked about a thing, it gave you joy in stages, which I thought was a really great phrase, because we can struggle, and we don't always get that feedback and that joy, and like just even the process of sending it out is giving you joy in stages. I just thought that was a wonderful way to put it.
Well, there's joy in the writing itself, and then there's joy in finishing it, and then, you know, to have someone else read it. Yeah, writing is great in so many ways.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, I'm going to wrap up this chat we've been having. Thank you so much for sharing all this with us, Tammy.
Thank you so much, Julie. It was wonderful.
Thanks for listening. Why not come over to the blog at storyaday.org and check out this week's writing prompts and articles. And in the meantime, have a great creative week. And of course, keep writing.